the end of the chapter, or the whole of the chapter, we watch Esther going through the motions of the, if you want to call it, the beauty contest. And she wins. It's a very successful chapter. When you look at it, Esther's won, Persia's version of The Bachelor. She gets The Bachelor. She's now queen. Mordecai, he's intersected a plot, if you remember at the very end, a plot to assassinate King Xerxes. And through his relationship with Esther, he's able to alert the king. The king is saved. And Mordecai's name goes in the book, and it seems like it's a huge triumph. And the end of that chapter, it's like, yes, this is a triumphal end. We even half expect Mordecai perhaps to become Persia's M of the secret intelligence service. Who needs Judi Dench when you can have Mordecai? You think that perhaps there's a promotion coming to Mordecai, that everything's going well, there's a huge success. So then we go to chapter 3. And as we did read last time, it says, after these things, King Xerxes promoted Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha. So nothing happens with Mordecai. He's just sort of left. He's kind of ignored. But we have this man, Haman, who is introduced. And it goes on and it says that Xerxes advanced him and set his throne above all of the officials who were with him. And all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage. Then the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" And when they spoke to him day after day, and he would not listen to them, they told Haman in order to see whether Mordecai's words would stand. For he had told them that he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down nor pay homage to him, Haman was filled with fury. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. So as they made known to him the people of Mordecai, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. So as we read that bit, we can see that these few little events, they escalated pretty quickly. It goes from Mordecai not bowing to all of the Jews being annihilated. I mean, that is quite the jump that he goes. And so we are introduced to this Haman after leaving the previous chapter in such triumph and success. It now plummets. There's a turn. It takes a turn, and it takes a very dark turn to the annihilation of all the Jews. So we have this Haman, and he's introduced as an Agagite, which is, he would be a descendant from King Agag, who was the king of the Amalekites. Now, I'm not going to explain all of this to you. If you have the book, then the Digging Deeper section has you go through who the Agagites were and the history of it. So I would recommend going through those questions and learning exactly who they were. Needless to say, all I'm going to say is that they were the enemy of the Jews for years and years and years. They were the Amalekites. And in fact, it was God who said that they will have war with the Amalekites from generation to generation. So here is this war that is continuing. But like I said, there's a lot more to the story, so you can go and dig deep into that and actually learn about the story if you don't already know. So the Lord says that there will be war, and here we have this Agagite. Now there's a debate on whether he was actually an Agagite or not. Some people say he couldn't have been. Other people say, well, actually, he could have been. The Jews would also name people Agagites who weren't necessarily Agagites, who were just enemies of the Jews. So they did have that habit of doing that. So it could be that he actually wasn't a real descendant, but he was really an enemy. And they've labeled certain other people Agagites, even though they weren't. So it was kind of a name given to the enemies. Now, whether he was a real descendant, I think he was, but whether he was or he wasn't, the point is he was the enemy of the Jews. And that is the biggest point that we need to know, is that he is a complete enemy. Now, as well, all this history that I tell you, it kind of explains why this event of not bowing has escalated to genocide, because it does seem a little bit over the top. That's just outrageous, isn't it, really, that he would do that? But if you look at it at the history, if he really was an Agagite, and you look at the history, then there is that deep-rooted history with the two people, with Mordecai and Haman, and that would account for why they did hate each other. It's rooted in history. And if you read the story, what happened to Agag wasn't very nice. He did deserve it, but it wasn't very nice. And so if you're a descendant of him, you're going to be upset and you're not going to be happy with the Jews. So there is that history and there is that reason. And, if you look at people and you look at life, we don't just escalate things for no reason, do we? There's usually a deep-seated reason as to why we overreact at certain things. And so I think there was that deep history as to why Haman just completely overreacted at this one man not bowing. So we have that history. Now, the thing that we don't have, which is frustrating, again, in the book of Esther, is we don't have the actual reason why Mordecai refused to bow. We don't really know specifically. It doesn't tell us. Again, the author fails to give us that information, which is a little bit annoying. And when you think about it, all of the Jews almost lost their life because he didn't bow. Wouldn't you want to know why? I'd kind of want to know, why didn't you bow? So we don't have the actual reason, but you know what? It's kind of like that in life, isn't it? Sometimes we'll never know why things happen. Sometimes we won't know the reasons why people do things. But what we have to do is continue trusting in the Lord. And what we have to know is how we should act and the rightful way for us to act, because we don't always have the answers. And we don't have the answers here. Now, we do have a hint. There is a big hint. It's not a direct reason, but it's an indirect reason. And if you read it, when the people pointed out that Mordecai wasn't bowing and they were asking him why, the only answer they got was because he was a Jew. So that's the only reason we have. It's an indirect reason. It's to do with him being a Jew, which I think it might still be with his history, the Jewish history. It doesn't really point to the religion. And it's not actually, the Torah didn't forbid Jews from respectfully bowing to a leader. There was no rule to say they couldn't do that. And in history, it says that they did. And it's not the same as worship. And so, you had, when Nebuchadnezzar did that statue and ordered everybody to worship, they refused, didn't they, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, because that was worship. So that's different. But just paying homage to somebody, just paying respect, a bow, that actually was not against the Torah. So he wouldn't really be breaking any law. So it wasn't to do with his religion. Plus, we also know that he told Esther to keep quiet. So it's kind of like, Mordecai, we're not sure, how well he wants to keep the Torah anyway. So it doesn't seem like it's a God has forbidden me or anything like it. It does seem like it's a personal reason. He's a Jew. And he's got something against Haman. And it could be this deep-seated history with Haman. It could be that he's just not a very nice bloke. It could be that he really was persecuting the Jews. There could be a lot to it. We don't know. So we're not given an actual reason. We don't know the direct reason, but we know the indirect reason is to do with him being Jewish. So that's all we can say. We can say that Haman was against the Jews, and because Mordecai was a Jew, he wasn't going to bow to Haman for whatever reason. So we do see, in the beginning where it says that the king actually told the servants who were in the king's gate to bow down. They are commanded to bow down. Now, this demanding of respect, we've seen it before. We've seen it in the first chapter when the king commanded Vashti to come in and give him respect, and she refused. But we also saw it as well when, Momencum decided he's going to command all of the women to respect the men. So we have this idea of commanding, and we've seen it before. And as I said, the first little tension between Vashti and the king, which spread to all the women, it's just sort of, it's a prelude to this bigger tension of Haman and Mordecai and the Gentiles against the Jews, this whole idea, because obviously, they're being told to give Haman respect. It's a command. They're all having to be commanded. And when Mordecai doesn't, there's this huge punishment. Now, Vashti got off lightly, didn't she, really? I mean, she was just sent into isolation, and the women were told, given a good telling off and told to just be nice and respectful. Well, Haman's punishment is death, and all of his people. And this is what, no, Mordecai's punishment was death, not Haman. And that's what Haman wanted to do, just wipe him out. Far worse. So it really has grown bigger. This whole idea, of punishing people, it's gotten worse. This tension is greater. It's a lot greater between Haman and Mordecai than it was between the king and Vashti as well. So it's this bigger tension. So it goes on, and it says, in the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Xerxes. So we have fast forwarded about 5 years now from Queen Esther being crowned as the queen. They cast that is, they cast lots before Haman day after day. And they cast it month after month till the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Xerxes, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different to those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws, so that it is not to the king's profit to tolerate them. If it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, that they may put it into the king's treasuries. So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, the money is given to you, the people also, to do with as it seems good to you. So sneaky Haman. Here he sneaks into the king. He starts to create his plot. Now, interestingly enough, he's going to put his plan into action. And he starts by setting the date first and foremost. So he casts this pur, which is a Persian sort of dice, and archaeologists have discovered it's like these little marble dice actually look a lot like our dice. They might have colors or dots on them, so it's very much like dice, as what they would say. So that was in Persia. It also says lots, which is what the Jewish people, they would also cast lots. If you remember, if you know your Old Testament, they cast lots for the land. They cast lots. The priests would cast lots. And they cast lots for Jesus' clothes, didn't they? So it was very common. So they did the pur because that was Persian. And so the author is just translating it into the Jewish knowledge. Like if they didn't know what pur was, it's kind of like lots. So that's what he's saying. So they roll the dice and he sets the day. And then he goes into the king. So he's making his plans. He is pretty adamant that this is going to happen. He's full on. He's going to go into the king. And if you notice the way he frames it, very clever indeed. He knows the king well. And he frames it as a bit of a half-truth, doesn't he? Because he tells them that there are certain people scattered abroad. Their laws are different. Well, that's correct. The laws are different. You got that bit right. But then it changes, doesn't it? And he says that they do not keep the king's laws. Well, that's not quite right, because they did. There was just one man who didn't keep one law. That was all it was. So he didn't quite frame it in the right way. He sort of twisted it, gave a little bit of a truth, but not really. He sort of made out that it's not in the king's interest that these people live. And so he's sort of making the king to be a victim and going, oh, king, I'm just looking after you. I'm thinking of you, king. It's not in your interest. It's not in Haman's interest, more like. The king doesn't really care. But he kind of gives it to the king, kind of makes the king into a victim. He's making himself out into a victim because this Mordecai isn't bowing to him, so he's feeling like a victim. And there he twists things, shades the truth, and portrays it as a way that he knows the king is going to give him what he wants. Now, if you cast your mind back to the previous chapter, there was that assassination plot, wasn't there? So the king probably was fearing for his life all the time and didn't want a group of people to not be obeying his law. So it probably did feel like a little bit of a threat. It might be that king's a bit ignorant. And as you see, Haman doesn't give him any details, doesn't say who it is, doesn't say who the law is very obscure, which, deceivers do, don't they? They don't quite give you all the details. They're just going to, leave it all a bit open-ended, a bit obscure, because they don't want to pinpoint any of their deception. So he doesn't give any details, and the king doesn't ask either. He's that kind of king. He's not bothered about the details. He's a bit, lethargic, or he's just not bothered. He doesn't want to know, and he doesn't concern himself with the details. Fair enough. If you think that they all need to die, Haman, then go ahead, kill them all. He's a wicked king. He doesn't care about all this killing that's going off. Just annihilate them as long as he's protected. So you have this issue as well with the money, which kind of sounds a little bit confusing. You might be a bit confused. Haman is pledging that money to the king's treasury. He's going to get the money from the Jews after he kills them. So he's going to plunder all of their goods, and that's the money. Haman does not have 10,000 talents. He's not that rich, but he's going to give the money that they plunder. So that's what it is. It's sort of a pledge. So the king goes, yeah, all right, well, I'll let you do that. And he gives him the ring. He gives him that ultimate power. And so whoever has the king's ring can pretty much sign off on anything. They can write any rule, write any check. There they are. They've got the king. They've got his ring. They've got that ultimate power, which actually is rather terrifying if you think about it for the Jews, that their greatest enemy that wants to kill them has got full power. There's no one above Haman. There's no one that can stop him. No one. There's no one above him. He has that ultimate power. In their eyes, it must have been really rather terrifying to know there's no one to stop him, except, of course, the Lord, who has even more power than Haman does. And we know that. They didn't have the luxury of knowing the end of the story, though they had to live through it day by day. So as we go on, and we read from verse 12, it says, then the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and an edict, according to all that Haman commanded, was written to the king's satraps and to the governors over all the provinces and to the officials of all the people, to every province in its own script and every people in its own language. It was written in the name of King Xerxes and sealed with the king's signet ring. Letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with instruction to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. A copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province by proclamation to all the people to be ready for that day. The couriers went out hurriedly by order of the king, and the decree was issued in Susa, the citadel. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. So here you have that picture of two men, one of them completely oblivious to what he's done and doesn't really care, and the other one probably laughing while the whole city is in confusion. Now that does, give you a bit of an indication of the state of the city. Not everybody was against the Jews because there was confusion. Nobody knew what was really going on. It was against the Jews, and there was definitely hatred towards the Jews, but there was confusion. So it shows that there wasn't complete hatred. There's this polarization that's gone off in the city that's caused confusion. And wherever Satan is, there's always confusion, isn't it? Satan likes to throw us into confusion. He wants to make us confused so that, we don't act in peace, so that we don't rest in that hope. But if we're confused, we can be distracted and taken down, and we can lose hope. And that is what's happening in this city. They don't really know. Some people might not know why the Jews are. Some people might be glad. There might be there's polarization. There's people that love them, people that hate them. We know that. We live in a society where there's a lot of polarization, a lot of different opinions. Some people love this, some people hate it. And there's confusion, there's division, isn't there? So we see that in this city, that there's this confusion. So here he acts upon this plan that is made. And if you see, it says that in the letter, that the instruction is to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate. And it's all the Jews, both old and young, women and children, not just men. It's everyone. It's absolutely everyone. And it's interesting that it says to destroy, kill, annihilate. They all mean the same thing. So he had to repeat it 3 times. It pretty much means the same thing, but he was making sure they were all going to be getting rid of, to kill, destroy, and to annihilate. So he's got such hatred, such vengeance towards the Jews. It doesn't look good, and it isn't good for Haman either. But the question is that how do we respond when honor doesn't come our way? What is our attitude? We look at Haman and you just think it was just a bow. That's really all it was. And yet he was so angry. There was obviously some bitterness, some anger that was there as well, but there was a lot of anger just because one man didn't bow. And so how do we act when things don't go our way? The answer depends on how highly we think of ourselves and where our securities lie. That's where the answer is rooted. We're going to look at that a little bit more. If we look at Haman, you can see he was clearly proud and he was also insecure. If one person refusing to bow can send him into such anger, there was obviously an insecurity issue there with him. Demanding to be honored and yet responding in that immature way when somebody doesn't bow shows that he's not secure in and of himself. In order for him to feel superior and special, he needed everybody to acknowledge it. He needed everybody to acknowledge it, every single person. If there's one person that didn't, he wanted to get rid of them. Because that's where his security was in praise from every single person. They had to give him that confidence. That's not real confidence. If it relies upon people praising us and honoring us, that's not real confidence. Our confidence doesn't lie in that. We don't need to have people to make us feel special. We shouldn't need to rely on people to fill every one of our needs as well. If we get angry because our needs aren't met, we need to start relying perhaps on something else other than people meeting those needs. Haman relied on everybody to make him feel special. Every one of his needs had to be met by everybody the way he wanted it. In John 12, verse 34, Jesus talked about the Pharisees, and he says that they didn't confess Jesus because they loved the praise of men more than the praise of God. And that was their downfall. They were seeking man's praise. And when we don't get the honor we deserve and when we feel upset and hurt by it, we have to ask, where are we seeking our honor from? Is it from men or is it from God? Do we have our eyes on the Lord, receiving his honor? We have to be mindful, don't we, as to how much praise we're actually desiring from people and how much of our identity and security is on people's praise and admiration of us. So we need to be mindful of that. Haman dealt with his rejection by demanding people do things for him, by twisting the narrative to make himself or the king look like a victim, by hiding the truth, by not telling it all, and ultimately by using violence to get his own way and to eliminate anybody that didn't please him. He didn't even want to see them or live with them. He wanted to eliminate them. So what's the right response? Well, I'm sure you know what that right response is. First of all, Mordecai, last time, he wasn't given honor, was he? He was forgotten. He received no honor. Yet we don't see him plotting to kill the king or anything like that. We see in his actions that he actually just went back to the gate where he originally served. He went right back to that gate and he continued to serve. Haman continued. He continued to do what he was called to do. He continued to fulfill that purpose that God had given him. And this is what we need to do. If we don't get the honor we think we deserve or would desire, we simply need to continue. We continue in God's calling. What has God called us to do? We continue doing it. Just because we didn't get that honor, that praise, doesn't mean that we don't have to carry on. It doesn't mean that we're not called to do it. It just means we have to do it for God's praise, not for man's praise. There are other things we need to continue in, though, as well, not just in our callings or in our duties, but we need to continue, as in Acts, when it talks about the church in chapter 1, that they continued with one accord in prayer and supplication. So we continue in God's calling, his purpose, but also his purpose is to continue in prayer and supplication and being of one accord, not in that confusion, not in that state, but being of one accord. It also says to continue in his word. We continue reading his word. We continue abiding in it. We also continue in God's love. It tells us that when Jesus prayed, he said that we would continue as his disciples in his love. We continue in that way. Colossians tells us that we are also to continue in faith. And so we continue in prayer, in supplication, in the word, in God's love, and in faith. And we walk in all of those things as we walk out our calling and our purpose, regardless of whether we get honor or whether we don't. We continue. The other thing, the right way of dealing with not receiving honor is to have the right attitude. And there's several attitudes here that we can see. The right response, as I said, is rooted in not thinking more highly than we ought. We need to think of ourselves humbly. As it says in Philippians, we honor each other, not ourselves. We don't think of ourselves too highly. When we think of ourselves too highly, we're going to get frustrated when we don't receive that honor. Like Haman, he thought of himself way too high. But Mordecai was more humble. He was a humble man. So we have to adopt an attitude of humility and know that we need to take that humble place, as Paul said in Philippians, to think of others greater than ourselves. The other attitude is that we are to be confident in our lot. And what I mean by that is if you go back to where it explains about the pur and the lots, and it says, this idea of the lot, the Persians were casting it for divination. They wanted their gods to decide. The Jews would cast it for the Lord to decide and for him to make that decision. When they inquired, like the priests would cast a lot for the goat and the scapegoat, and Joshua casted lots for their heritage. And so it is a way of placing the Lord over decisions that we make. And so the Israelites did that as a nation. But we also have to do this in our personal lives, don't we? We have to place the Lord over the decisions that we're making. This idea that God actually is in charge and in control of each situation, that's our lot. Proverbs 16:33 says, the lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord. So the Bible acknowledges you can cast a lot, and maybe it came out of our hands, the rolling of the dice, but the landing of the dice came from the Lord. He decides it. It's not us. We don't orchestrate it. We allow God. We let him give us our portion, our lot, if you will. So it's not just chance, but this is our lot. This is what the Lord has given to us. Like in Joshua when they gave their heritage. I love that. This is for you. That's your portion. This is for you. That is your area. These are your boundaries. And so we think of that when the Lord gives us our lot in life, our boundaries, our work, our family, our situation. This is what the Lord has given to us. In Psalm 16, verse 5 through 8, it says, O Lord, you are the portion of my inheritance and my cup. You maintain my lot. The lines have fallen to me in pleasant places. Yes, I have a good inheritance. I will bless the Lord who has given me counsel. My heart also instructs me in the night seasons. I have set the Lord always before me. because he is at my right hand. I shall not be moved. So this psalm, it also says that not only does the Lord decide our lot, but he maintains it. And I love that it says, you maintain my lot. So not only does he give it to us, but he maintains it. He is in complete control of it. And the psalmist recognizes all the good that comes from God. He sees it's a good portion, that he's got, what does he say? He says, the lines have fallen in pleasant places. Oftentimes we can only see the muddy areas, but we need to look for those pleasant places that the Lord actually has laid down those lines, the areas in our lives that is good, that we have a good inheritance. He sees that good. It also says that he will bless the Lord who has given me counsel. Now the Lord, he doesn't want to, he's not in control in the way of being like some mystery kind of man who is pulling the strings of a puppet. That's not what we think of the Lord when we say he's in control. It's not just that he's orchestrating everything and we're all just mindless. It's that we are to participate in his will. It's a relationship. So when he says, my heart, that I will bless the Lord who has given me instruction. The Lord wants to speak and he wants us to listen. It's a relationship. It's a counsel. It's an instruction. So it's not just a control mindlessly. It's for us to learn and obey and walk in his ways. So it's that relationship. It's communion. We're to participate in his will, not just sit back and let God do everything. But he also says in that psalm, if you listened and heard, that it says, my heart also instructs me in the night seasons. So acknowledging the good, he also realizes that there are times of darkness. There are times of confusion. There are pain. There is suffering. There is the night seasons where we can't see. We can't understand. We don't know why. And we might not see the good. It's those night seasons. So the psalmist there acknowledges that there are seasons of darkness. But he says that his heart also instructs me in the night seasons. And I love the thought that it's in the daylight, isn't it, that we learn, but it's in the darkness that we have to walk through. We have to put to practice what we've learned in the light in that dark season. And we have to walk through what we know, even though we cannot see. And our lot in life is not always going to be free from trials. There will be the night seasons. There will be the darkness that we have to walk through. But we walk through in faith. We walk through because Lamentations 3, verse 24 says, the Lord is my portion. Therefore, I will hope in him. The Lord is the portion. The Lord is the lot. The Lord is everything. He is that portion that we want. He is it. The lot that we're given is the life of Christ. That's the best lot. We have our own lives. We have our own individual boundaries and inheritance and work, but we all have the Lord. He is the greatest lot that we have. He is our portion. We hope not because we can see the light at the end of the tunnel or that little light through the darkness. That's not why we hope. But we hope because we have Jesus leading us through the darkness. He is our portion. He is our hope, not the answers, not all the answers to the why, but it's him himself. So when we actually trust in him and know that he's in control, that he is our lot, that he decides where the dice rolls. He is in control to it all. We have that confidence that even though somebody doesn't bow, we don't have to retaliate because God's got it. He's our portion. He loves us. He knows us. We're confident in that. And then the third thing that we see in this is the season of waiting and our attitudes during a season of waiting, which we know that is hard. But if we look at the text, it says that this happens in Nisan, which is the first month of the year. They cast their lots and it falls on the 12th month. I mean, you couldn't get the furthest month away from when they rolled the dice. You really couldn't. It can't be any further away. Of all the dates to choose, God chose the longest wait. And doesn't it feel like he does that to us oftentimes? He chooses that longest wait. And I could imagine that maybe the Jews were just terrified. They have to wait with that over their heads for 11 months. Haman might have been frustrated. He's got to wait 11 months. But they can prepare, sharpen their swords, get a tactic, identify the Jews, write down their names, where they live. They've got time, haven't they, to really plot their plan against them. But the Jews have to wait 11 months to see if the Lord will deliver. But also, interestingly enough, the month of Nisan is the month that Passover is celebrated. And when those letters are sent out, it tells us that on the 13th day of Nisan, the letters are sent, or the 13th day is in fact the eve of Passover. So as the Jews were getting ready to celebrate their Passover together, to celebrate the deliverance from Egypt, to celebrate God delivering them, to celebrate their special relationship with God, it's ironic that they then receive letters that they are all to be killed in 11 months' time. It might be that Haman actually decided he was going to do it on that date purposely, just to terrify them, maybe to mock God, that it's on that very day, that very eve. Yeah, he delivered you from Egypt, but he's not going to deliver you from me. He might be mocking God. It might be purposeful. But I could imagine the Jews who are all getting ready to celebrate, and then all of a sudden, that's going to lay a damper on that, isn't it? You've now got a death threat. Who's going to celebrate that Passover? I can't imagine that the celebrations were very fun that year. I don't know, maybe the Jews were strong and they're like, we're going to celebrate anyway. They could do. But I don't think I'd be able to celebrate. I think I'd forget that lamb, forget the preparations, and I'm just going to mope, for 11 months. We're all going to die. That would be my attitude. But the Lord, he knows. He doesn't waste that. In fact, the fact that it came on that eve, that he did deliver them, it is reassurance that he will deliver them again. It's his reminder that maybe it was Haman's intention to put fear in them, but he's saying, no, I delivered you in the past and I will deliver you in the future as well. It's that solid reminder for them to have that faith that God is going to deliver. So the date might be a mockery on his part, but God will use it. God uses that as his promises. His timing is perfect. It seems like God has lost control. It seems like Haman's in control. He's got the ring. God doesn't know what he's doing. But in fact, God knows exactly what he's doing, because although Haman has risen to a position, so has Esther. Behind the scenes, Esther secretly not secretly, but in God's will, he's risen her to a position as well. And although it seems like everything is lost, God knows exactly how to turn it around. He still has that plan. The timing is a reminder of God's faithfulness. And although the wait can seem long, and although we don't like the wait, it's how we use that wait. Do we continue to hope in God, even though it seems like he has chosen the longest wait for us? Do we continue to hope? Do we continue to look to the Lord? The Jews and Mordecai were forced to wait. And it's in that waiting that God created a greater good. They had to wait. They had to wait on him and see what he was going to do. Without the wait, the victory wouldn't have been so grand. It wouldn't have been so good if there wasn't that wait. So our waiting isn't a waste. It is not a waste when we keep trusting and abiding and hoping in him. It is never a waste. It's an opportunity to allow God to work in the areas that we cannot. It's when we allow God to fill that gap, because waiting feels like a gap, doesn't it? It feels a bit empty, a bit of a gap. It's allowing God to fill that gap with his presence, with his faithfulness, with him himself. So instead of grasping for control, trying to force our own way and our own will with anger or fury or even violence, the better attitude is to walk humbly with people, knowing that we too need to respect people, that every person is in the image of God and deserves respect, that we can respect them, but being confident that God honors us, that God favors us, even when we don't receive that respect, when people don't return the respect to us. We know that God does, and that we're confident that God's lot for our life is a good one, that it will work out for good. All things work together for good to those who love God and to those who are called according to his purpose. We hold on to that during the wait, and we wait for the Lord to work. So let's pray. Father, we thank you for Mordecai. Lord, though we don't know his reason for bowing or not bowing, Lord, we know that you used it, that you used even the hatred that Haman has to bring about good for your people. And Lord, as we leave the chapter in confusion, Lord, some of us might feel confused in our own walks, in our own life. We might be waiting and still wondering where your hand is going to work. But Lord, I just pray that we will hold on to you, that in that time of darkness, in the night seasons, that we would know that you are our portion, that we hope in you, that you will fill us with your presence, that you will fill that gap of waiting with you, and that we will have that hope that this will be for your good. And as we go through the book of Esther and see, even though you worked silently, you still worked. And Lord, may we take courage that even though you might be silent in our lives today, you are still at work. You are working in the background, and that you will show yourself strong in our lives. In your name we pray. Amen.